Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 19 transfer plans. This is a very short turnaround once again because we had these Boxing Day games, then we have these Friday games. I'm recording right now after the culmination of the Liverpool match. So yeah, pretty fun day of games in terms of what happened, I would say. I still have a lot of my players still to go, like Gabriel, Odegaard, Flecken, Mbumo, João Pedro. Obviously a little bit of sort of like results that aren't going to go my way in terms of Flecken and João Pedro, but things can still go reasonably well, I'd say, and I probably have more players compared to the rest of the field. So we're still on track for a potential green arrow, and clearly one of our bigger and better players this week is going to be someone like Odegaard, where hopefully he can provide some value. A lot of people have also been selling João Pedro. I think he's dropped in price, so a good own hopefully for this Brentford at home fixture once again, even though I have my keeper and pit against him. So that's kind of how it is. I do clearly only have one Arsenal defender, so I think the only massive way that I'll be losing out is, Saliba and Timber Halls or Raya Halls, things like that, which is a little bit out of my control, but that's fine. Decision-making wise, I mean, I played Lewis and Trent. They both got 2 points. No regrets there. I think they had great fixtures. I think the chances that they conceded were really poor. Newcastle, in terms of expected goals conceded, were probably a little bit better, but that's simply because of the John Duran red card, and you can't really account for things like that, so I don't really mind the decision in hindsight. As far as Castagna as well, that assist was pretty jammy, I'd say. But Fulham actually really deserved the result that they got, sorry. And that's that. The team is as it is now. It says I'm still 70k ranked, but I think I am right now 84,000 in the world. So a little bit of a rank drop, but nothing too consequential right now. In terms of the team, the Trent moving out of Guardiola, that was a bit scary because we started the day with Guardiola hitting the post. I think Trent also had a close assist because Salah hit the crossbar as well. And, we missed out on a great Leicester at home fixture, but no real concerns with Trent moving forwards. We're ultimately preparing for the double with someone like Trent, and he still is a really good play on most game weeks where hopefully he can deliver, not just that 15-pointer that we dream of, but the 8 and 9 pointers that he's more than capable of providing with the sort of amount of production that he's been creating lately. As far as Lewis, we're just purely looking for clean sheets, so he's kind of my fifth defender, but for now, because the immediate fixtures are really good and the opponents that Man City are facing are still really bad, I'd like to play Lewis. I know a lot of people will just think, yes, they've just been conceding clean sheets left and right, and that's fair, I think, as an argument, but even if you look at today, some of the Everton chances weren't particularly good, specifically, let's say, the goal in terms of the chance from NDIA, but you can also make the comment that, first of all, good finish from NDIA, and just shocking defending in terms of, I guess, dealing with the cross and positioning from the City defenders. And they also gave away a great chance at the end of the game versus Jack Harrison. So I think there's two ways you can kind of go about it. I still like to play with the clean sheet odds. The way I see it is a lot of models, a lot of market sort of predictions have adjusted for the fact that City are awful. And the reality is still playing teams like Leicester and West Ham, you get chances. Southampton were close to a clean sheet, for example, and Leicester were not really troubling Liverpool, to be quite honest. So outside of that goal from Ayew, right? And I think shoot or shoot is what you can say, and that's why Trent lost his clean sheet. But I'll take my chances going forwards with players like this. And for Hall, I think he's more of a play for me, Game Week 21 plus, because when I look at Hall's fixtures, ultimately the next two games, I don't think I'd particularly like to play him in, just because they're away fixtures, and it's still United, who are looking pretty flat on offense, and they'll be Bruno less. So maybe that's quite significant, but I still think Lewis is the play this week, and Castagna is close as well because he's got Bournemouth at home, but I think Bournemouth is still a very respectable team. It's more about playing Castagna, for example, in Game Week 20 as an example. So those are kind of my thoughts right now. And yeah, that's pretty much sort of my thoughts in terms of FPL. I think in the world where Lewis drops still at 4.5, for example, that's not going to really affect me because I own him. If you look at the transfers and list pages, I think it's very helpful for any manager who wants to kind of get an understanding of how much money that they have in the bank truly, whether they're actually going to lose value on players or not. If you just go to the transfer page and then click on list, you have a good understanding of what drops will affect you, what price rises will affect you. So Rico Lewis can drop one more time, and that's not really going to affect me. I think him dropping back to 4.5, I don't see him dropping any further than that. And if he's my fifth defender, then so be it. I think that's totally fine. Castagna will probably rise in the future, and Cunha, after a nuclear Hull versus United, very lucky with the corner goal. Then the assist was a little bit more clean, a little bit more easy and realistic. He seems like he's maybe going to evade a drop. I will be struggling with the drop in terms of losing 0.1 in value from him if he drops anyways. But hopefully Cunha does not drop, and I get to keep Cunha at this sort of 6.8 selling price, which means that whenever I sell him, if I do, he leaves on that sell price. Another thing I'd probably like to mention this week is We saw what happened to Spurs. They put on a pretty, I think, tame result, but so did Nottingham Forest from the offensive point of view. So if you want to sort of discredit, I guess, Spurs for being a really poor defense, ultimately Nottingham Forest didn't create that many chances, considering that Dragusin was also injured within that game. Porro was benched. He did come on eventually. I'm still thinking that Porro is probably going to start a game like Wolves. I don't think that's super significant in terms of the clean sheet expectations, but Wolves have been pretty fortunate with scoring some of the goals recently. Like, they've been converting 3 goals or 2 goals per game from close to nothing in terms of expected goals. So yes, of course, you can say that they have high quality finishers, which I think is maybe fair to say of someone like Cunha right now. I mean, look at the overperformance on XG so far for him this season. You can just have a quick look here. I mean, he basically has racked up, 4 XG, and he's scored, how many goals has he scored? Like maybe like 10? I don't even actually know where the goal scored is 10. So yeah, I mean, that kind of just gives you a picture of how much overperformance Cunha is. And it's not like Cunha is the type of finisher where you give him a chance, he scores 2 every time, right? He is clearly in a run or a purple patch of overperformance. I'm not saying necessarily I know exactly when that purple patch is going to end, but I also think it's just unsustainable to have unrealistic expectations of Cunha every single week. So I still think he's someone who we will sell, and we know that the ban is around the corner as well. Raptor sort of made a really good comment about how the FA probably aren't, I guess, caring too much about the ban per se. So it might mean that, everyone's on holiday now. You have Game Week 21. You also have Game Week 20, where the deadline is still during a sort of holiday period, and that probably means that Cunha is going to get away with it, and then people come back. People come back to office between, let's say, 20 and 21. So that's kind of how I see things. I think Cunha is probably going to leave my team. Either he leaves now or he leaves the week after. But one of the issues I would say with the forward landscape right now is it's poor, right? If we just go by the position of the forwards, it is a bit strange. Like, I have to say, I think Jackson could potentially still be benched, because it seems like this Chelsea team looks really lethargic. That somehow, even with all this sort of European rotation that they've been run into the ground, I think they looked really poor in the last 20 minutes, but that was also a Jackson-less 20 minutes, and maybe that's going to have a positive impact on Jackson's ability to start. We also know that Wood has been going a little bit cold recently, and I don't think that's necessarily, he's underperforming, overperforming, anything like that, but he hasn't had the same sort of quality of chances within recent games, right? The Spurs game a good example, the Aston Villa game a good example. They're also developing new patterns of play. So not really are they a team that is just purely set piece goals and Wood goals, but you're seeing a lot of the wingers get a little bit more action, and that's good, I think, for the overall ceiling of the team and sort of play style pattern of the team and in terms of how teams match up to them and game plan around them. But yeah, I mean, Wood has been struggling a little bit, but his minutes have still been good. And when you look at the sort of forward landscape, I think, Duran's injury helps, or Duran's red card helps with Watkins for the next 3 games, which are really good, but he's still at an extremely overpriced price point, in my opinion. As far as, let's say, Solanke, we know Spurs are up and down, and there are some games where they rack up 3-4 XG. There are some games where they rack up 1 and nothing really happens. Wisa still is a really consistent pick. I'm kind of still priced out of him in terms of being able to go there, because I just have 3 Brentford players, and on top of that, there's still a really poor run, and I don't love him. We know Welbeck is out, but probably could be coming back soon. Vardy also missed the most recent match. Evan Nilsson is starting to get rotated. Havertz, I'm not even sure what happens with this Arsenal game, but I'm expecting that Jesus is probably the only pick that I quite like if Jesus maintains his form, and I think that's quite situational as well. Gakpo has gotten a lot of starts recently, but he's still 60, 65 minutes, sometimes more per game, and I still think that it's a bit concerning from that perspective, because you can still expect more rotation coming in when Luis Diaz is ready. I don't know why Luis Diaz missed out on today's game, but it seemed like it was for personal reasons, and so you can kind of read into it that maybe if Luis Diaz is ready to come back, that Gakpo could get rested. Whereas with Havertz, him playing midfield isn't great. With Raul, you're still just going to naturally see Raul Muniz rotation because Raul's age, and I don't think he can play more than 70 minutes a game. And Muniz just got another late game goal, which helped Fulham win, which is huge. Delap has bad fixtures, and Mateta's probably the only other pick that I actually find remotely interesting, because he actually has good minutes, he has penalties, but the only thing I'd say is his underlying stats aren't particularly good. So it goes back to that sort of age-old argument of like production and things like that. But yeah, generally speaking, over the course of the season, pretty average expected goals per 90 for a striker who doesn't even play 90 minutes per game. So it's a weird landscape, and I feel like maybe, the simple play for me is to just go and keep Cunha, to maybe bypass Solanke for this game, reassess what the landscape is. Who knows? Maybe an Armstrong is actually interesting because Southampton actually have some decent fixtures. Maybe the point of going for Armstrong as well is that I can invest more in the midfield. But I also really like my midfield too. It's really a question of Mbumo's fixtures, and going back to that, I think that makes it quite tough. But that's sort of a bland assessment of my team. With Flecken, I always tend to ignore goalkeeper moves. So the reason why I kind of ignore, like, let's say an Allison type of move, and I probably will continue to ignore an Allison type of move, is because I do think goalkeeping outcomes are a little bit erratic. Even though we have clean sheets and things like that, I think the value of owning defenders sometimes is you get these attacking returns. And so there's a little bit more of ways that you can get access to certain points, whereas with goalkeepers it's kind of binary in the sense that you either get a clean sheet or you don't, or there's a very, very small slim chance of a penalty, and also an even slimmer chance of a penalty save. So that's kind of the reason why I still own Flecken. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people are going to look at this and say that there's no reason to own Flecken, he's a terrible pick. And yes, Salas has outperformed him, Sanchez has outperformed him, but it's also, I think, something that I struggle to go with right now in terms of justifying whether I really want to make another goalkeeping move until I really decide on what I want to do with Pickford and Allison for the double. Because the way I see it is, maybe I go triple Liverpool, but the way I go triple Liverpool is, we could wait up until the double, and there could be an attacker that generally arises alongside Salah who has really good minutes because of injuries and whatnot. If I go to Allison too soon, I'm kind of blocking myself from that situation. If Konate's back, then I think he's someone that I can definitely consider, because you just have access to Liverpool at a very cut rate price. As far as Pickford, though, I mean, he's an interesting goalkeeper, because you're going to ride out these Everton poor fixtures, and that's why I don't really want to make the move necessarily away from Flecken. Like, I think Nottingham Forest is a great game, but up until the double, the fixtures are really poor. But what if I suddenly go into Pickford around 24, 25? Suddenly Pickford actually looks like a really good pick and a really good long-term hold, generally speaking, up until the next run of fixtures, which is 30 plus. One thing I've been thinking about too, and that's probably when I wildcard, right? So that's why Pickford makes a lot of sense for me. On top of that, one thing that I've been considering too is the idea of maybe going for Flecken and Pickford later down the line if I have money. And that's what Saka ultimately gives us in this landscape, right? Saka has been redistributed to Odegaard for me. I'm not going to go to Bruno anytime soon up until maybe Game Week 21/24. I might go to Bruno in 21, but that would be a very, I guess, like, specific move that I would make, like maybe through a Solanke later down the line and going into like two forwards potentially, and then going Bruno over Mbumo, or I suddenly just go Odegaard to Bruno as a single free transfer on 21 or 24. Because if I look at, let's say, the Arsenal fixtures, 21 is actually now a really good game. It's red on the FDR, but that means nothing to me. Spurs is just a great team to target. So the next best chance I would say is just around 24, where Bruno also has a pretty good run of fixtures then, and could be a nice little sell from Odegaard, because Bruno's just not going to blank on Game Week 29. So something we need to think about as we're building our transfer plans is what teams play on Game Week 29, and it all comes down to these Carabao Cup fixtures. So if we go to Game Week 29 now and do a little bit of fixture analysis, so if we go to 29, we know that the teams involved in the Carabao Cup right now in the semifinals are Arsenal, Newcastle, Tottenham, and Liverpool. So you can see, based on the expectations, Arsenal versus Newcastle, that game could be quite even now. I think Newcastle's looking really good. But Arsenal, if Arsenal, for example, were to win out in that semi-final, the issue that creates is that also makes the blank game week very, very severe, because it also takes out, the likes of Palmer on that blank. It also takes out all your Arsenal assets. As far as, let's say, Spurs, if they somehow beat Liverpool, I guess that's Spurs and Fulham, so not that impactful. Right now, I'm not really hurt by this. But our expectation is going to be Liverpool wins out, right? And if Liverpool wins out and Arsenal win out, which is the most likely scenario anyways, you're going to be taking out your Liverpool, Aston Villa, Arsenal, and Chelsea players. So that has some impacts in terms of, one, how you plan the assistant managership. Potentially what you could do is double Liverpool and then go assistant manager 25 if double game week 25 is a go. So that means you could maybe not have too many Liverpool outfield players, but still get the value of a double game week with Liverpool by going for Arne Slot. At the same time, when I look at, let's say, Arsenal and Chelsea, look, Palmer is there, and I've got two Arsenal players. I've got two Liverpool players right now, and I have Morgan Rogers. So that's a lot of investment into these teams, and that's something to think about, right? Your budget transfers, your players that maybe are equal in comparison, have a think about whether they're going to play in Game Week 29, because I think that can have a huge impact. So when you look at, for example, Bruno here, the reason why I'm still always going to eye up an Odegaard to Bruno move is because Man United have a good fixture in Game Week 29, and it's quite nice to kind of have that sort of optimization in the team. But it's also quite far away where we don't have to worry too much. It also depends whether you wildcard earlier or later, right? If you somehow plan to wildcard late, like let's say Game Week 30, which is I would say the meta template because it's suggested by Ben Crullen, then you need to think about how you're going to manage all these transfers up until Gameweek 29, how you're potentially going to fizzle out of your Arsenal players, fizzle out of your, excess Chelsea players that aren't Cole Palmer and things like that. Because you don't want to be selling Cole Palmer because of the value loss implications. You don't want to be selling, let's say, Mo Salah because of the value loss implications there. And same with Trent potentially. So if I just name a couple of players now, I mean, I probably would be holding Gabriel, Trent, Palmer, and Salah up until all the way until 29. And I could sell Gabriel, that's true, or I could sell Trent, but we need to make those decisions somewhere after the double. Or for Arsenal, it could be in the short term, right? I think this game week is an interesting game week where there's so many good defenders in the game at that sort of 4.x price point, the likes of the Palace defenders, the Bournemouth defenders, that there's the justification that you don't need to spend that much money now because we've kind of identified some sort of medium tier budget defenders that actually are really good value for money. Whereas previously in the past, only the premium defenders, I would say, have given really good value for money after taking into account rotation from the budget defenders. But now you've got Fulham as good defense. You've got Bournemouth as a really competent defense. And you also have Crystal Palace who are looking like they're surging to be a good defense. And we've got Lewis Hall, right? So 4 or 5 really good budget defenders across the board in general. And that really helps you plan things like selling Gabriel later down the line, selling Trent later down the line. But we also need value within the midfield and the forward positions. And right now, as I said, the forward position looks slim and the midfield position is slim because we have taken out one of the best players in the game. Nobody wants to go into Haaland because he's ultimately just not super valuable. Like Haaland's going to have his 2 best fixtures over the next 2 matches. And I don't think he's going to even have an EO dent on the game. So he really is right now for the first time completely irrelevant, I think, from FPL. Anyone can go to Haaland and get his points. And I think you can get the value and the upside there. But I'm just making an argument from an EO perspective. So that's kind of my thoughts. And maybe the point is, you upgrade someone like Rodgers later down the line. Like, for example, Gordon looks really good. He's someone that I actually wouldn't mind putting into my team. And maybe I can trim down from someone like Cunha instead, because if Cunha's gone and suspended, maybe I don't want a Solanke. Maybe I actually just want a midfielder at the same price point as Solanke who might be a bit better, like Anthony Gordon. And that could be how I play FPL for the rest of the season. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. It's a little bit of a tricky landscape. I think Armstrong's one of the picks that I'm looking forward to as well in terms of budget forward that I don't mind as an 8th like attacker, the same way that Rodgers or Semenyo or Ahmad or Sarr have been for a lot of our teams. And that's kind of how I'm viewing things right now. So that's kind of my team. A little bit of a longer winding discussion, but I felt like it was now important to jump into discussions of chip strategy elements of the game too and how to plan ahead, because all your small incremental moves in the future will have some impacts later down the line, right? You can't remove all your players in your team now. You're going to own these players up until you don't, and you need to sort of plan your transfers, assuming that the players coming in and coming out will stay in your team for, more than 5-6 game weeks at a time, because that's usually how things are in FPL. You just don't have enough transfers to constantly change your team. So as usual, we're back with the Fantasy Football Hub My Team Pick and Rating tool. As I've said over this period, you still have access to a Christmas or December discount. So happy holidays to anyone who's watching this video right now, and Merry Christmas as well, if you weren't on the deadline stream, that sort of stuff. But on Game Week 19 here, we're starting with what my team looks like and hoping that Cunha doesn't drop in price so that I still get that 0.1 value from him, and he's still a 6.8 player. But yeah, have a look at the link in bio below if you want to have access to some of these tools. You can actually get a free trial for 30 days off and make the most of these tools. So if I start with this game week, I'm going to be honest and say I'm definitely going to play Trent over Castagna. I'm not quite sure what the issue is with Trent's expected points. It feels way too low, but I'm definitely going to play Trent. It's probably between Lewis and Castagna, but I still think that it makes sense for me to play Castagna. I'm probably actually going to bench either João Pedro or Mbeumo. Right now, I kind of like the idea of actually playing Rodgers and benching João Pedro, and that's kind of how I plan to play my team. The captaincy is super close, and both Palmer and Salah looked great within their respective matches. The Palmer finish was exquisite, like genuinely insane how easy he makes football look sometimes. But Chelsea haven't been like a super well-oiled machine, right? The attack has somewhat tapered off. The defense is slipping. So some of the baselines have been dropping for Chelsea, and it makes sense that the league table position is sort of reflecting that. Whereas a team like, let's say, Bournemouth or Arsenal have generally been more consistent over the course of the season, even though the results haven't necessarily reflected that for Bournemouth. And I think that's so impressive for Bournemouth, to be honest. And Fulham too, really good team as well. So understandable that Chelsea, struggled with that result today. But yeah, I think it probably makes sense for me to go with Salah. this is one of those weeks where you take into account something like risk preference, and you make that decision between whether you go for Salah or Palmer captaincy. I do think that Palmer looks like the more enticing pick just from a fixture perspective, but Salah is the most productive player in the league, not in terms of just the outcomes, but just the underlying stats as well. So the raw XG, the raw XA is nuts. So I'm probably going to captain Salah, all things being said. I'm not going to clickbait you into a Palmer captaincy this week that I'm probably not going to go for. But I'll make that decision come close to the deadline. And it comes down to risk preference. Maybe I'm a little bit happier, about my rank, and I might want to change my decision making then, but something to think about. Odegaard is in the team. I'm quite happy with him as a pick. It seems like the AI doesn't love him so much, and potentially it could once again come down to things like how much pen share a model has on Odegaard. And I tend to believe that Odegaard takes the next penalty. So the way I see it is, until he takes that next penalty, I'm kind of pricing him in my head as the penalty taker of the team. And that's how I play the game if the penalties are in doubt, right? If you have someone like Bruno, he might give a pity penalty, but your expectation is he takes penalties. In this situation, yes, we know Arsenal are a team that like to gift penalties, and the only established penalty taker is Saka. So I subscribe to the idea, and that's why I've gone for Odegaard, that he's on penalties, but that's not 100% certain, and I can understand models having a slightly different approach, or different models having a slightly different approach at the same time. So this is kind of my team. I'm pretty happy with it as things stand, but clearly the transfer that could interest, right, is in that forward position, Solanke for me. But they just lost Dragusin, Spurs did, so it could make sense to maybe just not go into Solanke. There are some tough fixtures there, right? If I look at Solanke's fixtures now, you've got Wolves at home, Newcastle home, which I think are still both good, and then Arsenal away, which is just awful, Everton away, which is probably honestly awful right now, and then you've got back to great fixtures, right? 23 plus is another great run of Solanke games. The way I see it, though, is I'm generally concerned if you're going to get that much value out of different teams. Like, if I suddenly go to Jackson and he's prone to being benched on Ipswich away, there's no value there. I can't even go to Jackson, so maybe it's a bit of a moot point. But yeah, Crystal Palace away is actually looking like a pretty tough game nowadays. Bournemouth at home, pretty tough. Wolves at home, I would say still quite good, but Wolves actually look like a really decent team right now. If you look at their expected goals conceded rank right now within the league table, it's actually pretty impressive. You know, they don't look like a bad team at all. City away, you know, maybe that's actually still a decent game. And then West Ham at home is an amazing game, but then Brighton away it's all right. It's still an away game. So I don't think there's necessarily that many good Jackson fixtures to sort of justify the price difference. And I still think Solanke is a very rock solid pick in terms of, I think his minutes are so good, and Spurs are still so up and down, but still have these ups, right? Ultimately, where Solanke can provide you some value. The hub model clearly prefers Mateta, and potentially that's just because Southampton at home is sort of banked in here. But yeah, generally the fixture run for Crystal Palace is better. So it's really a decision between, let's say, Mateta, Solanke, and just keeping Cunha for this game week and then making an alternative decision. So I'd say on my first transfer plan, I'm just going to go Solanke first, right? I don't really like Wood right now. I still think the Wood fixtures are mediocre. Everton away is pretty tough. Wolves away is nice, but then you've got Liverpool at home. So that already looks pretty poor. So if I make that transfer now and then go to Game Week 20, I'm probably going to roll here in Game Week 20, and I'm probably going to roll in Game Week 21. But the big thing on Game Week 21 is when I look at my team, there's a couple of players that I could potentially sell, right? Game Week 21 is a week where you can look at someone like an Odegaard and potentially move him to Bruno, who actually has a really good fixture on this game week. You can also just move, let's say, Rodgers out once again. So this is, if I missed, let's say, the Southampton fixture for Ismaila Sarr, which is why I'm keeping Mbeumo, basically, right? It's sort of that decision between Mbeumo and Sarr. Plus, I would have played Rodgers for Brighton at home, Leicester at home, which I think are good games. But then he's got two bad games in Everton away, Arsenal away. The thing about Rodgers that makes me really want to keep him is he still has really good fixtures anyways, like West Ham, Wolves, and Ipswich back to back. So it kind of feels like I don't really want to be transferring out of Rodgers, but I just want to have rotation. And I do have rotation anyways through someone like João Pedro. And maybe I just reluctantly play one of the players between Solanke and Rodgers is probably how I would approach it. But I could actually be rolling for the foreseeable future, and I can just be optimizing around my defense anyways, but playing Trent most of the time because I don't know why the Trent sort of expected points is a little bit lower than I'd expect. And that's kind of how I plan to play for the foreseeable future. So suddenly I would be able to, I guess, head deep into Game Week 24 with quite a few roll transfers, right? Because I make a transfer in Game Week 20 or 19 rather. I roll 20, I roll 21, I roll 22, I roll 23. And that's 4 fixtures rolled. I then have 5 free transfers heading into this Game Week 24, and I can make all the moves that I want in the world. And I think that's probably the position that I really want to go to, right? Not too many transfers within my team, not too many decisions forced, and then suddenly I have the luxury of being able to maximize around the double and optimize my team a little bit more. And around game week 23, 24, or even 21, as I said, I could look at shipping out Odegaard, but it really just depends on whether I actually like keeping Odegaard anyways post 24 and how he compares against Bruno over this run, and whether I really want to make that move away from Odegaard. And it comes to maybe if Arsenal, for example, get a penalty and Odegaard doesn't take, suddenly he's an immediate sell for me, something like that. And the landscape can change a lot. Whereas when we get to 24, the nice thing with Mbeumo is that his fixture run suddenly becomes really nice because you're starting from Spurs at home and then you've actually got a really good run of games. So that's kind of my plan, to get towards Gaming 24 with 4 to 5 free transfers and not to force too many transfers in the immediate term. So that's transfer path number 1. Transfer path number 2 is something that I'm thinking about where, once again, I take into account that Cunha is probably not going to get suspended for Game Week 19. I then roll in Game Week 19 instead. I come to Game Week 20 with two free transfers, and I would expect that right now, hopefully, Cunha finally gets banned. Not hopefully, because I probably want to keep playing him forever, but I would say Armstrong is a little bit interesting just as a rotation piece. So if I suddenly go into Armstrong, I could be looking at potentially selling some of the other players within my team, or I just go Cunha to Armstrong for now, and then I just move on, right? I optimize my team here. I play Rodgers. I probably play Armstrong or bench Armstrong. It doesn't really matter because I think the whole team here has good fixtures. On the next game week, this is not a great Mbeumo fixture, but I still think I play him over everyone and I move on. I potentially will actually think of shopping Rodgers here, because by shopping Rodgers on 21, either I jump into, let's say, an Eze, a Sar, or unfortunately I'm blocked from Bruno, but I could just be looking at even a Bowen and coming back to him because he's got such good minutes, and who knows what Paqueta minutes are like. So that's kind of my thought, right? The idea that I maybe just go for Sar or an Eze around this game week, because you still have a really good run to capitalize on with Crystal Palace. You kind of missed the Chelsea game, but then you actually have Leicester, where you've got West Ham, you've got Brentford, Man United away, which isn't great, and then Everton at home, which is still okay just because it's a home game. So this could be a good game week to maybe part ways with Rodgers. I'd still be able to maximize these two games, but then I do lose out on Rodgers in the long term here, which isn't ideal, but it also gives me a chance to reassess what I want to do my defense. But once again, we don't really want to be forcing too many transfers. So let's say in the best case scenario where I use the most amount of cash, I go for someone like Eze here. I make this transfer. I optimize my team. I probably play Trent once again, but then I then kind of carry this team all the way up until this kind of breaking point here in Game Week 24, where you move into your Everton attackers potentially, you move into your Everton defenders, you move into a new goalkeeper, that sort of thing. And that's sort of my rough plan. So that's kind of my thoughts right now. I think I'm either going to make, let's say, 2 moves with the Armstrong path and then maybe go for a better midfielder over Rodgers, or I just go for the Solanke path and I just roll all my free transfers up until Game Week 24 and then make good moves around the double, because I think my team is now really robust. Like, Gabriel and Trent can play every single week, and then I have 3 defenders that I can rotate between to try and optimize around clean sheets and sort of expected goals, all that kind of stuff within my defenders. Whereas I keep Fleck in reluctantly, but I don't think I ever put my team into a spot where I'm suddenly pigeonholed into triple Liverpool. I'm suddenly pigeonholed into Pickford, but I want Alisson instead, that sort of thing. So those are kind of my thoughts for Game Week 24 and how I plan around it, because the double game week is coming. But we also know that the double game week can be Game Week 25, right? So heading towards Game Week 24, we need to just be aware that the whole point of carrying free transfers is not because we know that the double is 100% going to drop on 24, but rather it's going to drop on 24, 25. And it probably makes sense unless your team needs a lot of surgery to rotate around things like that. So those are my thoughts right now in terms of my transfer plans. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week.